Welcome to This Explainer. You know that awful pit in your stomach right before asking for a raise? Or that creeping anxiety when you're trying to hammer out terms for a new contract? Yeah, we've all been there. You are definitely not alone. Negotiation usually feels like this incredibly stressful zero-sum battle, right? Like every single inch you gain means the other person loses. But what if I told you it doesn't have to be that way? Today, we're completely flipping the script. We're going to break down exactly how to shift from that exhausting adversarial tug-of-war into a structured, collaborative problem-solving process, one that actually creates value for everyone. So, to kick things off, let's look at a classic problem. Imagine two kids fighting over a single orange. Their positions are identical. They are both screaming, "I want the whole orange." Now, how do you resolve this dilemma and get what you want without completely destroying the relationship? Well, the immediate, obvious solution is probably just to chop it right down the middle, right? A fair 50-50 split. But what if we paused for a second and just asked why they want it? Turns out one kid just wants to squeeze the juice to drink, and the other kid literally only needs the peel to bake a cake. By understanding that underlying utility, they can actually both get exactly 100% of what they need. This simple little scenario gets to the very heart of what we're talking about today.
Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to cover 1. The negotiation dilemma, 2. Getting to yes, 3. Finding the agreement zone, 4. Advanced negotiation tactics, and finally, 5. Limits and criticisms. All right, let's dive right into section 1, the negotiation dilemma, the absolute core of deal-making. So picture the negotiation spectrum. On one far end, we have distributive bargaining. This is your classic zero-sum win-lose game. Think of it as fighting tooth and nail to claim the biggest possible slice of a fixed pie. If I get more, you automatically get less. Now, on the exact opposite end is integrative bargaining. This is where negotiators actually have shared or complementary interests. It's a win-win problem-solving approach where you work together to actually expand the pie before you divide it. Now, in the real world, most negotiations are kind of mixed mode of situations, right? They hover somewhere between these two poles, containing a messy mix of common and conflicting interests. For a stark and honestly pretty wild real-world example of aggressive distributive bargaining, just look at the infamous Cod Wars. Between 1958 and 1976, Iceland repeatedly used highly competitive zero-sum tactics to basically wrestle fishing rights in the North Atlantic away from Britain. They started by unilaterally extending their fisheries limit to 12 miles, then 50 miles. They even used gunboats to fire on British trawlers and physically cut their fishing wires. No joke. Finally, in 1975, they extended the limit to 200 miles, literally threatening to leave NATO and align with the Soviet Union if their demands weren't met. And, well, as a strategy for claiming value, it actually worked out for Iceland. They wore the British down. But it perfectly highlights how purely adversarial tactics can invite a massive, incredibly costly war of attrition. Moving on to section 2, getting to yes, and the concept of principled negotiation.
What you're looking at are the 4 foundational pillars from the 1981 blockbuster framework, Getting to Yes. Developed by Roger Fisher and William Ury at the Harvard Negotiation Project, this method of principled negotiation was a total game changer. It shifts us completely away from hostile positional haggling. First, you separate the people from the problem, meaning address emotions and perceptions directly, but be ruthlessly hard on the problem itself. Second, focus on interests, not positions. Third, brainstorm to invent options for mutual gain. And fourth, insist on using objective criteria, like market value or precedent, so no one feels like they're being taken advantage of.
Let's zoom in on that second principle for a second, because it's arguably the most powerful. Back in 1978, both Israel and Egypt held completely rigid positions regarding the occupation of the Sinai Peninsula. I mean, they wouldn't budge. If they had simply argued over their positions, literally just where to draw a line on a map, they would have been deadlocked forever. Instead, they had to look at the underlying reasons why they held those positions in the first place. The crucial breakthrough is captured perfectly right here. Israel was interested in security, and Egypt was interested in sovereignty. By identifying their distinct, complementary interests, Israel's fundamental need for security and Egypt's deep need for sovereignty over their own land, they suddenly realized they weren't actually fighting over the exact same thing. This massive shift in perspective is what ultimately led to the historic Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty of 1979. It's basically the orange story we talked about earlier, but played out on a massive geopolitical stage. All right, let's jump into section 3, finding the agreement zone. Let's look at the actual math of a deal. When you first sit down at the table, the bargaining space usually feels just like this: cloudy, foggy, and incredibly uncertain. You don't know what the other side is actually willing to accept, and they sure don't know your limits. But to cut through all that fog, you have to map out your boundaries. Naturally, you start with your aspiration point, your absolute ideal outcome. But honestly, much more importantly, you absolutely must define your absolute limit. And that brings us to a crucial concept: the reservation point. Your reservation point is your absolute bottom line. It's the precise moment where walking away becomes mathematically better than making the deal. Think of it as, say, the absolute lowest salary you'd accept before just deciding to keep your current job. If you're a rational actor, you will never, ever accept a deal that leaves you worse off than your reservation point. It's your anchor. And knowing those limits creates the magic space where deals actually happen. Let's imagine a house sale. The seller's absolute minimum, the reservation price, is $200,000. Meanwhile, the buyer's absolute maximum reservation price is $250,000. Because the buyer is willing to pay more than the seller's minimum, that $50,000 overlap is what we call the zone of possible agreement, or ZOPA. Any settlement within that 50 grand space leaves both parties better off than if they had just walked away. The negotiation then just becomes a dance to see exactly where in that zone the final price is going to land. Okay, Section 4, Advanced Negotiation Tactics. Because what happens when things get tough and uncertainty reigns? Well, you rely on your ultimate shield, and frankly, your ultimate source of power, your BATNA. That stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. Basically, what are you going to do if you stand up and walk away from the table right now? Knowing your BATNA completely protects you from accepting a terrible deal just because you feel pressured. It gives you a strong, logical backup plan. I mean, if your BATNA is super strong, say you already have 3 other job offers, you're going to negotiate with immense confidence. But if your BATNA is weak, well, you know you need to work a lot harder to find an integrative, creative solution to make this deal work. Beyond your BATNA, you can also leverage a little bit of psychology. In moments of uncertainty, people naturally look around for clues on how to behave. This is known as social proof. You can gently guide the other party just by showing them what others have done in similar situations. For example, if you're selling a house, limiting an open house to just a single hour can create this crazy buzz, packing the house with people and instantly signaling high demand. A really fantastic, real-life example of this comes from a brilliant infomercial writer named Colleen Sott. Now, she already had a proven knack for getting TV viewers to buy products, but she managed to absolutely skyrocket her sales further by doing almost nothing. She simply altered a few words in her standard call to action. Notice the fascinating psychology behind this tiny shift. Previously, the line was, "Operators are waiting, please call now." But think about it. That conjures an image of bored operators just idly sitting by silent phones, right? By changing it to, "If operators are busy, please call again," it instantly triggered that powerful social proof. Suddenly, viewers at home imagined phones just ringing off the hook. The implicit message was, everyone else is buying this, you better join the crowd and act fast. It is a truly masterful use of psychology in a business negotiation context. Finally, let's transition to Section 5, Limits and Criticisms. Because, let's be real, no model is perfect. Scholars have definitely pointed out a few blind spots with these frameworks. Primarily, models like Getting to Yes heavily assume that actors are fundamentally rational and that trust isn't strictly necessary. They can also really oversimplify complex collective entities. I mean, negotiating with a single, unified person is very, very different than negotiating with a highly fractured state government. Critics also note that these frameworks sometimes downplay the messy reality of deep power struggles. And, importantly, they have a predominantly Western cultural bias that might not translate seamlessly across all global business cultures. For instance, dealing with dirty tricks or severe power dynamics, sometimes that completely breaks the model. Former FBI hostage negotiator Chris Voss points out that seeking a mutually beneficial win-win solution fails entirely in hostage situations, like the Waco siege. When you're dealing with someone who thinks they're the messiah or a completely irrational, hostile actor, finding mutual gain is practically impossible. In those high-stress, dangerous situations, Voss argues that sometimes the goal isn't getting to yes, it's actually getting to no. But look, for the vast majority of our daily challenges, from closing a huge business deal to just managing a small team, these principled frameworks are still incredibly powerful. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought to apply to your own life. The very next time you find yourself in a tense discussion, just pause. Ask yourself, are you just arguing over your rigid positions, or will you dig a little deeper to uncover the shared interests that actually lead to yes? Thanks so much for watching and keep looking for that value.